You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. Happy anniversary, White Sox fans. A long time ago, on October the 26th, you won a World Series. Well, the White Sox did, but you won it as well, because you put up with just terrible ownership and an awful team for years and years and decades and nearly an entire century, and then you won. So you won as well with that, and it's been a long time since we saw a World Series. I was looking at Jeff Blum hitting a home run in Game 3 highlights right before we sat down to record this, because that's what people are doing. They're throwing all the highlights up way back when this was a magical week, so people are reliving it in the middle of the awful atrocity that is the White Sox at this current moment and the state of the team. And I was looking at the Jeff Blum highlights thinking to myself, this is the one thing I missed during that entire week. And I was sitting on the couch in my apartment that I shared with my new wife at the time, now my ex, and we had our first on the way, and it was towards the end of the pregnancy. Think about that. This kid is at the University of Illinois right now, not yet born, when the White Sox won on October 26, 2005. That's how long it's been. Just think about that.
And not only are you freshly married, but your relationship has run its course in the interim as well. So.
Exactly. Think of how long it's been and how much has changed in my life. But I was watching in the living room area of the apartment. There weren't very many places to go at that time, and she was so close to having Audrey that it was only comfortable for her to be on the couch. It was like one of those things, like couldn't get comfortable in the bed. So I had to watch that game go later and later into the night in pitch black darkness while somebody snored next to me. So eventually I nodded, and I actually nodded with Blum at the plate and woke with him rounding second base and thought I was still in the middle of a dream. And then I was like, wait a minute, did we just take the lead? Like I had to come out of my sleep. I just nodded. I mean, it felt like that game was going on forever. I nodded. And I was like, did we just hit a home run? And then my phone goes off and it's my dad and he's yelling on the phone. And I'm like, I missed it. And then he yelled at me for nodding. And I'm like, I taped it on my VHS. I actually have the game on VHS tapes.
Also, a sign of how long ago this was.
When the commercial break hits, I actually go back to watch the home run because there's no such thing as TiVo. I had to go back real quick, watch the home run, be like, oh my God, I can't believe I missed that. That's amazing. And then get back to live television and restart the tape. So I have all the playoff games on VHS somewhere in a bin somewhere. And there's that one commercial break missing because I had to go back and watch the tape of Blummer hitting the home run.
See, but that's the kind of memory that you want to have from a World Series victory. I called into work the next day because I stayed up way too late watching Jeff Blum hit that home run, and there was no way I could answer the bell. You know, on the anniversary of this day, I mean, I think it's only fair to blow a kiss off into the air, just like Blummer did when he was going back into the dugout and, celebrate with a sandwich, because that's what A.J. Przinsky wanted really badly when he told Blum to go and end the damn game because he was hungry.
Right, and then Burley's got to go out there drunk. Mark Burley goes out there, throws 3 pitches, and ends the game.
Yeah. So, it's that's what's the beauty of really of any championship, right? You remember where you are, what you were doing, what it means to you when you're a fan of a team. But for the White Sox and for White Sox fans, like you said, we all really won it because of what the team had put us through as fans and as a fan base for decades, so, almost a century at that point. And it is still something where that was just such a remarkable run too. I mean, it was such a great playoff run and a great run through the World Series that there was the moments are indelible. I mean, honestly, it is one of those things where because of Blum's home run, because of Scotty Pods walking it off, hitting his second home run of the season, and both of them were in the postseason. When you get to Game 4 and you get the little RBI single up the middle from Jermaine Dye that ultimately wins it, that moment, like I remember that moment, but I'm like, Blum's homer's cooler.
Oh, give me a break. Jermaine Dye driving in the run at the end was pretty damn cool too, because even up 3-0, we were White Sox fans. Even up 3-0, I was very nervous that we were still not going to win the World Series. That's how battered we were as a fan base. And trust me, I remember my dad saying, you'll never feel this way again if they win another one, because it'll never be that bad as a fan as waiting, 87 years. And, Jerry Reinsdorf's done his best to make sure that one day you'll get that same feeling. Like that younger generation, you're going to get that feeling of you don't believe it could actually happen. And when it happens, you'll feel the same way I did in 2005. Thanks, Jerry.
Because it's been almost 20 years since the World Series victory.
Right. We have a guy that's coming on this show today who wrote a book called Sell the Team, Jerry. I love it. He's coming on the show. It's
great.
Just coming out, I think next week. So I got the advanced copy emailed to me because I couldn't even get the hard copy yet. And I was like, yeah, you're coming on the show. And it just going through it, it's just chapter after chapter of just examining every little bit of how Jerry even got the team and everything he did. And I think it's a wonderful companion for any White Sox fan, so they can just use this book for anybody that argues that he's a good baseball owner, because he's not. So we have that coming up later on. Sox Nerds coming up later on. And just a quick sneak peek into the future here. The next episode of Sox in the Basement, a random conversation. I had Senator Bill Cunningham, Illinois State Senator, down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar for another podcast, the EP podcast out of Evergreen Park. And in the middle of that interview, we somehow got on the White Sox in the stadium thing for about 10 minutes. And when it was done, I was like, can I air that on the Sox show? And he was like, go for it. And it's very interesting to hear somebody from the legislature talk about what he really thinks is going on with Reinsdorf and this supposed move threat, which I know La Russa said, I don't think he's going to sell the team. And
Tony.
Right. I know he just came out and said that and ruined Jerry's bargaining power. But when you listen to somebody who's in government, who actually has, it sounds like, been on committees that have explored, stadium deals and things like that, actually talk about, I think, the impossibility of Jerry getting this 78. It's very telling. I don't think anybody from that level has really talked about it in depth. That'll be on the next episode of Sox in the Basement. Before we get to our guest and everything else, though, we've got to get to the three names that were put out by John Heyman. He has put out three names that he says are basically the three finalists, or the three names he's hearing the most for the Chicago White Sox. And it sounds like they're down to Rangers bench coach Will Venable, former Angels manager, remember he was an interim manager, Phil Nevin, and Tigers bench coach
took over for Joe Madden,
George Lombard. And what's interesting about those names, and I want to hear your thoughts, Venable's the unicorn. He's the one the Mets wanted and the Mets got turned down because he is the heir apparent in Texas. He's comfortable there, and Bruce Bochy isn't going to stay there for very long. He's probably gone in a year or so. So he's very hard to pull away. Nevin seems like the old school guy. Lombard's the bench coach of the guy you should have gotten if the owner wouldn't have stepped in and made the last regime hire Tony La Russa. And I feel like looking at these three names, that if you get Venable, here's a guy that doesn't need to agree to anything, Ed. He could just sit there right now and say, I'm in a great position. I turned down the Mets last year. I want this money. I get complete control of my staff. I'm not taking anybody on that you force upon me. Like if he gets hired, I think anybody that he keeps around, he wanted around, and things have changed in there. If Nevin gets hired, I feel like Tony's still pushing some buttons, or at least getting a say and pushing the old man in a direction of more of an old school type guy, even though I don't think he's a bad hire. And if Lombard gets hired, I feel like it's like a compromise. That's my gut instinct. I might be completely wrong, right? I might not know what I'm talking about, but as a fan, I look at those three names, and that's my initial reaction.
Well, and I'm sure Tony La Russa will go on WBBM radio and spoil it for Chris Getz while he's negotiating with all three of these guys by saying which one he's definitely not going to hire. But
maybe that gets Tony kicked out of the building because he totally screwed Reinsdorf on saying that.
Yeah, he really did. I mean, just don't talk, man. But no, I think you're right about that. I think Will Venable, based on the desire around the league for him to be a manager and to sit in the dugout and run it for a lot of different teams, I'm sure, that's going to be one where if Chris Getz pulls it off, you're right. I don't think Chris Getz gets him in here and is able to dictate terms necessarily. I think that's the guy that you have to go out and say, what do you want? And I'll give it to you. There's some guys that just have that negotiation. You go into free agency this year, Juan Soto can ask for whatever the heck he wants. Okay. There are guys, Gavin Sheets becomes a free agent. He's going to have to take whatever he can get. So Will Venable is the Juan Soto, right? And that's an amazing hire if he can pull it off. Not to say that Will Venable is guaranteed to be a great manager, but that's one of those things where a team gets what everybody else wants, and so you get that sort of like universal, this was a good move to see what this guy has because everybody thinks that he's going to do it.
He's the window and door superstar of Oak Forest of windows, doors, patio doors, storm doors. Like if you're going to replace your manager with the best option, it's Will Venable. Those other things, it's window and door superstore of Oak Forest. No high pressure sales. You go see them in their big, beautiful showroom, see everything in full color, owner in showroom and on site, all window and door superstore installers. They don't farm out the work. They've been doing it that way for 40 years in Oak Forest since 1985 with all major brands custom made and no stock items for a perfect fit. Window and door superstore of Oak Forest is located 1/2 block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. They would be your first choice for work like that. Will Venable would be first choice at manager, I would think.
Phil Nevin, his experience is basically taking over for Joe Madden with the Angels. He had a bad team. He developed some young guys. He worked with them. He made the best of a bad situation. He dealt with an aging and often broken down Mike Trout. There's a lot of things that Phil Nevin has gone through that seem like corollaries with the White Sox. And I don't know enough about Phil Nevin's philosophies based on that, because when you're thrown into a bad situation, you can't really sit there and say, well, he was really great with the analytics, because if you're handed a roster full of garbage players, it doesn't matter what the analytics say. You're not going to be able to do anything with that. And the Angels were a bad team. I don't know how the Angels, they felt worse at times than the White Sox, and that's hard to do. But when you're looking at George Lombard, I have no idea. You and I had this conversation before we started.
Yeah, we had to look him up a little bit.
We had to look up who George Lombard is, and it turns out he was an outfielder. He spent 5 years as a Dodgers coach between 2015 and 2020. I have to get the dates right. See, I don't even know. And right now he's A.J. Hinch's bench coach. So yeah, he seems like it's like getting diet A.J. Hinch, if you get George Lombard.
He's one of the 4 names that the Chuckster put out 4 days ago. He's over there on Chicago Sports Network now. It's funny which guys got to stick around on Jerry's new station and which ones didn't stick around on Jerry's one, right? Like if you criticize Jerry, you're not around anymore. If you carried water, you're there. And I'm not saying carried water for the team. Did you carry water for Jerry Reinsdorf? I think that's the difference. And you see that in who's over there on the station that most people can't see unless they go get an antenna. But he put out 4 names, and he had Venable and Lombard along with Clayton McCullough and A.J. Ellis. I mean, if I remember this right, because I'm looking at like a tweet that came after it that was describing what was in the video, and I know I watched the video a few days ago, and I thought about this as we were talking, but he had a couple of names. So it's interesting that he had 2 of these 3 names, and Heyman's got out of his, he's got these 2 guys, and then he's got Phil Nevin. It's interesting. I really do think we're starting to see smoke. We're starting to see smoke around certain names. Anybody else outside of these names would be a surprise hire. And I would think right now Getz is in the middle of negotiating with Venable. That's the best candidate. It seems to be the best candidate. It seems to be from coast to coast baseball people thinking this is the right guy. He's got one heck of a pedigree. He was around when the Cubs put together what they put together in 2016. He's got a good idea of the front office. He's got a good idea when it comes to managing. He's been around the right people. It reminds me of Ozzie Guillen. Everybody thinks, oh, well, Ozzie was just hired because he used to be the shortstop here. No, Ozzie Guillen got a lot of experience being a bench coach, being a third base coach, hanging around some pretty big names and Hall of Famers on their benches before he got his first job as a manager with the White Sox. Venable feels like that guy who's been around an awful lot of people that know what they're doing, and all those people are like, yeah, he gets it. He should be a manager in Major League Baseball. Again, this is why the Mets went after him. I would imagine right now as we're talking, unless between us talking right now and this show coming out, there's been a hire, I would imagine that the negotiations are going on right now with him as the number 1 option. And the hope is that the team doesn't get in its own way trying to secure him by forcing somebody onto his bench or into his staff or not giving him what a manager deserves to have from its front office.
Well, and you bring up, he's been around the right people and he's been around a long time, good baseball minds and is ready to do it. George Lombard feels like the sneaky version of that. Like I said, 5 years on the Dodgers staff, on their major league staff, that's a really good, that's World Series winning years for the Dodgers. That's a really good team to be a part of. Being on A.J. Hinch's staff, that's a really good manager to be sitting there and be a part of what Hinch is doing. So that's a guy that you could sit there and say, okay, I can see some pedigree there too. And he might be just the backup version of Will Venable, right? That may be Lombard's appeal. And we don't know that much about him. But if you think about what they said, they wanted somebody who's currently in uniform, somebody who has been in organizations that have shown the ability to win, and A.J. Hinch has shown the ability to win when he's been a manager. I mean, I understand the whole Astros debacle that fell and caused the sword to fall on him, but you can't deny that the Astros were a powerhouse under A.J. Hinch. You cannot deny that really, did anybody expect the Tigers to get to the playoffs this year? No. Did A.J. Hinch get them there? Absolutely. That shows something as well. So we should have had that, obviously, in the dugout already, but getting his right-hand man is, it's a very White Sox consolation prize. But I think you're right. I think it is Will Venable is the guy that Chris Getz is pushing hard for, is the guy that he's negotiating with. He's the guy that he's going to see if he can lure him the way the Mets couldn't. And then I would guess that Lombard is probably the backup plan. And when you're hearing names like, Phil Nevin, it's kind of like Skip Schumacher. It's just, okay, this guy seems to fit the parameters and he's an interesting enough candidate that if it came to that, it's not a bad move. And that's kind of the best you can say about Phil Nevin is he learned at the hands of Joe Madden, and Joe Madden had a lot of success. Weird dude, but he had a lot of success. So maybe Phil Nevin fits that bill too. But if I'm going to handicap it right now, just based on the way the White Sox always end up operating, I bet you they miss out on Will Venable. They're not able to complete the deal because there's something that someone in that organization is just not willing to give him that should have been a layup that you do for the guy. And I bet you they end up with Lombard.
Joining me on the phone line right now, the Sox Nerd, Dave Marin, who puts all those incredible tidbits and trivia nuggets up on the scoreboard at the rate each and every home game, and he's brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore, and remember that November the 2nd is the Fall Trail Run Festival at the Forge. See more about that and everything going on at LamontDowntown.com. Nerd, what do you got for me?
Chris, last week it was a Sox-centric look at the Yankees. This week, let's move on to the Dodgers. Gavin Sheets feasted on the league champions this season. Last week I told you all that the big lefty's .526 average and .947 slugging percentage were among the highest ever posted by a Sox player against the Yankees. While Sheets wasn't as lethal against the Dodgers, the other World Series combatant, he was still good, slashing .375, .375, and .625 in 3 games against the National League champions. All told, Sheets hit .481 with a .481 on-base percentage and an .852 slugging percentage against this year's World Series teams. The Sox were swept by the Dodgers from June 24th to June 26th at Guaranteed Rate Field, but it wasn't for a lack of pitching. The Sox posted a more than respectable 3.33 ERA against the Dodgers, but were shut out twice in the highest drawing 3-game set at the rate in 2024. The only teams that posted a lower ERA against the Dodgers in 2024 were the Phillies at 2.72, the Royals at 2.88, and the Orioles at 3.24. While history may not treat the latest Sox-Dodgers trade too kindly, there was one swap between the clubs that changed the course of White Sox history. On December 3rd, 1971, the Sox acquired Dick Allen from the Dodgers for pitcher Tommy John and infielder Steve Hunts. Allen went on to win the 1972 AL MVP award at a time when the Sox needed a hero. Some put forth that Allen saved the franchise with that season. The greatest game between these franchises came on June 18, 2005, when A.J. Pierzynski capped a 4-run ninth with a 2-out, 3-run walk-off homer in an electrifying 5-3 win. That night, White Sox DJ Chris Hubble, the best in the business, sent the 36,000-plus at U.S. Cellular Field into a complete frenzy by breaking out "Let's Go, Go Go White Sox" by Captain Stubby and the Buccaneers. One more. The 1959 World Series between the teams was nuts from an attendance standpoint. The games at the Los Angeles Coliseum, the first 3 Fall Classic contests in California, each drew at least 92,300 people. They are still probably and will always be the top 3 attended games in World Series history. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder, you can access my blog at soxinthebasement.com, and there is plenty of Sox Nerd material on Twitter. My zinger, this may be hard to believe, but the White Sox and Dodgers own the same amount of full-season World Series titles since 1966, and that number is 1. Since 1966, the only full-season title the Dodgers won was in 1988. The only titles LA has won since then came in the shortened seasons of 1981 and 2020. That's it, Chris. More than you wanted to know about Gavin Sheets, Dick Allen, Tommy John, and Captain Stubby and the Buccaneers.
The Sox Nerd getting it done, all while fighting illness. I don't know if you can notice that, but I can notice it listening to him. I tried to give him the week off. He would not do it. That's the commitment you get from the nerd on Sox in the Basement. Joining me on the phone line right now, we have a guy who I think, as we were just talking here before I brought him on the show, had written one published thing and is a big White Sox fan and had an idea for writing a book about the terrible season the Sox were having. And it evolved into something much different. The author of Sell the Team, Jerry, Brian J. Siebel, joins me on the line. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing great.
So you're a longtime White Sox fan. You decide you want to write. You are watching this historically bad season. You're watching the last couple of years. And then it evolves into, wait a minute, forget the season. Let's go to the source of the problem. And it's Jerry Reinsdorf. And this is a pretty detailed book that you were able to turn around, get out, get published. It's on Amazon. You get the ebook, you can get the paperback, you can get it right now sent to you. And we're still watching the World Series of the season that just ended, and you've got everything down. So when did you actually start writing this? Are you like a super writer? Did you get this done in like a month, or is this something that you were working on all year long?
No, I got it done in a month. I basically started writing after the season ended.
Is this your therapy? Is this the cathartic release after watching this? Like, I mean, because in reality, like, I think that's crazy. Like, you wrote this book in a month and got it published on Amazon, and you got copies of it. You can actually get a copy in your hand of this quickly. I love this because this is, White Sox fans are angry right now. They're looking for a way to get it all out, and you found a way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I actually have kind of given up on the team, last year, and but this is my cathartic way of, exercising my demons about the White Sox. And I still actually would be a White Sox fan if Jerry Reinsdorf could be pushed out and competent ownership came in. I would resume my White Sox fandom, but I just have had enough of Jerry Reinsdorf.
Oh, so this is the end. Like this was your goodbye letter, which is essentially a book with, really breaks things down from moment to moment, starting at the beginning with what happened with Bill Veeck, and then Reinsdorf walking in and buying the team for $19 million, and then everything he does stage by stage. And I'm going to tell you, what I've read so far of the book, it's a nice little step-by-step guide, especially for people that either weren't paying attention or weren't around the younger generation to understand how we got to this point, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I decided to go decade by decade and break it down because he started in 81, so the decade worked. And it walks it through. And I think one of the worst moves Reinsdorf ever made was the first GM he hired, which is Hawk Harrelson. Okay. Why is he hiring a broadcaster out of the booth to run the team? And in 1 year, he didn't even make it through the whole year. He fires Tony La Russa, who goes on to, with Oakland and St. Louis, to win 13 playoffs, 6 pennants, 3 World Series. But he also fires Dave Dombrowski, and Dombrowski goes on as a general manager, manages 5 teams, GM for 5 teams. He takes 4 of them to the World Series. He wins 2 of those World Series. Okay, they had the guys in-house when Jerry Reinsdorf first bought the team, who could have actually done competent management all these decades. And instead, he hires Hawk Harrelson, and it was just the first of the many, very bad GM hires that he made.
One of the best parts about this book is that you don't skip over to things that aren't necessarily about the team itself. And you do touch on things like Jerry Reinsdorf's role in the 1994 strike.
Yeah.
And he had a big role in that. And while he had a team that was on the field that could have won the World Series. I mean, they were very, very close to beating the Blue Jays in the series the year before. And the Blue Jays go on to win the World Series. Joe Carter famously with the big walk-off home run. But that was a very close series between the Sox and the Jays in 93. Sox come back in 94 and they're better. And everybody who remembers that knows they were a better team in 94. They were a team that was going to go on and had an incredible chance to win the World Series. There are people who always go, oh, the Expos, that would have been their time back in 94. I believe firmly it would have been the White Sox hoisting that trophy, and their own owner got in the way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was Frank Thomas's best year. I mean, he was his second MVP year. He was on a complete tear. And yeah, the team was in first place. I mean, they had second best record in the AL at the time. But yeah, they were certainly a team to be contended with in 94. And yeah, Jerry just pulls the rug out from under him. And then after that, it all fades away. So incredible, bonehead moves, all about money. And then the bizarre thing was, a couple years later, he signs Albert Bell to the richest contract at the time in baseball. Where was that coming from, right? So Reinsdorf didn't do things very logically over time. But I break down all the things that he did that, there's 5 hallmarks that I think cover his 44-year history with the White Sox that show, repeatedly over and over again the mistakes that he made and that, White Sox fans sadly had to live with.
In writing this and going through step by step everything that happened with Jerry Reinsdorf and the White Sox up to this point, do you come to the conclusion that he is an evil owner, or do you come to the conclusion that he's just not a very smart owner who makes bad decisions?
I think the latter. I think he thinks he knows it all. He's an owner that thinks he knows everything that and he isn't willing to take good advice. And he doesn't know it all. He doesn't even, he's very bad about making some of these decisions, but he's just stuck in his ways.
Did this whole thing help? Did writing this book make you feel better? Because again, you watch the season, you're angry, you sit down, you write and get published a book titled Sell the Team Jerry, and you gather all these things. And I'm sure, I believe you'll probably look back and be like, next edition, I got to add this. Or you're going to have people reach out to you and say, what about this thing here? Because it's done so quickly, but it's so detailed. Did this make you feel some sort of closure? At this point, are you like, I got over this, I feel better, people can read it, they can kind of have closure with me, and then we're all just waiting for the next owner of the White Sox, whenever that may be?
Well, I'm a lawyer, and this is actually the case against Jerry Reinsdorf. So it's really my present to White Sox fans who want to see the end of this ownership. The Chicagoans have started this campaign. They put up billboards. There's a lot of angry White Sox fans. So I'm really giving them the ammunition for carrying on that campaign and making this actually happen. So yeah, I feel good about it. I've moved on in a lot of ways. I'll return if there is new ownership, but otherwise I'm, it is in my past, but it's also a little bit of a tribute to my late brother. He's the one who inspired me to a love of baseball, and he was originally a White Sox fan as well. So, it's a bit of a tribute to him, and I'm really glad to have been able to do that because he's really taught me most everything I know about baseball. that's another little part of it. But I'm really happy to hand this off, and I hope White Sox fans who are angry and who have been living through this can pick this up and really use it
as a tool for arguments against the team, which I kind of like. I like having that. It's like a little handbook that I can hold on to when the team puts out something, or Jerry says something, or one of the people that carry Jerry's water say something. I can go right to your book and be like, nope, that's not true. This is what really happened. Brian J. Siebel wrote this book. I love the fact that he did it right after the season ended. He's already got it out on Amazon. You can get yourself a hard copy. You can get yourself an e-copy. It's called Sell the Team Jerry. The cry of every Chicago White Sox fan reaches a crescendo after the losingest season in Major League Baseball history. Brian, I appreciate you jumping on the show. I hope everybody goes out and checks out the book. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.